Gases are literally all around us. The air that we breathe is a mixture of gases. Other gases include those that make breads and cakes soft, those that makes drinks fizzy, and those that burn to heat many homes. Engines and refrigerators too depend on the behavior of gases. The study of heat and temperature is a part of physics known as thermodynamics, in which we require a system to be macroscopic, that is, to consist of a huge number of molecules of the order of 10 power 23. We are all familiar with few of the macroscopic properties of a gas: volume, pressure, and temperature. We also know that the simple model of a hypothetical ideal gas describes these properties very accurately under many conditions. Further, to describe real gases, we need to move from the ideal gas model to a more widely applicable approximation called the van der Waals model. To understand gases even better, we must also look at them on the microscopic scale of molecules. In gases, the molecules interact weakly, so the microscopic behavior of gases is relatively simple, and they serve as a good introduction to systems of many molecules. The molecular model of gases is called the kinetic theory of gases and is one of the classic examples of a molecular model that explains everyday behavior. We will now explore the thermal behavior of gases. Our word gas comes from the Flemish word meaning chaos, first used for vapors by the 17th century chemist J.B. van Helmont. The term was more appropriate than he knew because gases consist of molecules moving and colliding with each other at random. This randomness makes the connection between the microscopic and the macroscopic domains simpler for gases than for liquids or solids. How do gases differ from solids and liquids? Under ordinary conditions, such as those of the air around us, the difference is that the molecules of gases are much farther apart than those of solids and liquids. Because the typical distances between the molecules are large compared to the size of a molecule, as shown in this figure, the forces between them are considered negligible except when perhaps they come into contact with each other during collisions. Also, at temperatures well above the boiling point, the motion of molecules is fast and the gases expand rapidly to occupy all of the accessible volume. In contrast, in liquids and solids, molecules are closer together, and the behavior of molecules in liquids and solids is highly constrained by the molecules' interaction with one another. The macroscopic properties of such substances depend strongly on the forces between the molecules, and since many molecules are interacting, the resulting many-body problems can be extremely complicated. One consequence of the large intermolecular spacing in gases is that gases are easily compressed. This table shows that gases have larger coefficients of volume expansion than either solids or liquids. These large coefficients mean that the gases expand and contract very rapidly with temperature changes. Also, it is observed that most gases expand at the same rate or have the same coefficient of volume expansion. This raises a question. Why do all gases act nearly in the same way when all the various liquids and solids have widely varying expansion rates? To study how the pressure, temperature, and volume of the gas relate to one another, consider what happens when you pump air into a deflated car tire. The tire's volume first increases in direct proportion to the amount of air injected, without much increase in the tire pressure. Once the tire has expanded to nearly its full size, the tire's walls limit its volume expansion. If we now continue to pump air into the tire, the pressure increases. When the car is driven and the tires flex, their temperature increases and therefore pressure increases even further. This figure shows data from experiments of Robert Boyle, illustrating what is now known as Boyle's law. At constant temperature and number of molecules, the absolute pressure of a gas and its volume are inversely proportional. This graph displays this relationship as an inverse proportionality of volume and pressure. This figure shows experimental data illustrating what is now known as Charles' law after Jacques Charles. Charles's law states that at constant pressure and number of molecules, the volume of a gas is proportional to its absolute temperature. Similar is Amonton's or Gay-Lussac's law, which states that at constant volume and number of molecules, the pressure is proportional to the temperature. That law is the basis of the constant volume gas thermometer. It is known experimentally that for gases at low density, such that molecules occupy a negligible fraction of the total volume, and at temperatures well above the boiling point, these proportionalities hold to a very good approximation. Not surprisingly, with the other quantities held constant, either pressure or volume is proportional to the number of molecules. More surprisingly, when the proportionalities are combined into a single equation, The constant of proportionality is independent of the composition of the gas. The resulting equation for all gases applies in this limit of low density and high temperature. It is the same for oxygen as for helium or uranium hexafluoride. A gas at that limit is called an ideal gas. It obeys the ideal gas law, which is also called the equation of state of an ideal gas. The ideal gas law states that PV is equal to N kBT, where P is the absolute pressure of the gas, V is the volume it occupies, N is the number of molecules in the gas, and T is the absolute temperature. The constant Kb is called Boltzmann constant, and it has a value of 1.38 into 10 power minus 23 joule per Kelvin. The ideal gas law describes the behavior of any real gas when its density is low enough or its temperature is high enough that it is far from liquefaction. This encompasses many practical situations. We will see later why it is independent of the type of gas. In many situations, the ideal gas law is applied to a sample of gas with constant number of molecules. For instance, the gas may be in a sealed container. If capital N is constant, then solving for N shows that PV by T is constant. We can write this fact in a convenient form as P1V1 by T1 is equal to P2V2 by T2, where the subscripts 1 and 2 refers to any two states of the gas at different types. Again, the temperature must be expressed in Kelvin and the pressure must be absolute pressure. Suppose your bicycle tire is fully inflated with absolute pressure of 7 into 10 power 5 pascals at a temperature of 18 degrees C. What is the pressure after its temperature has risen to 35 degrees C on a hot day? Assume that there are no appreciable leaks or changes in volume. Now, in this case, the pressure in the tire is changing only because of changes in temperature. We note that the initial pressure is 7 into 10 power 5. The initial temperature is T0 is equal to 18 degrees C. The final temperature is 35 degrees C. And we have to find the final pressure. So we can write PF VF by TF is equal to P0 V0 by T0. Now, since the volume VF and V0 are the same, they cancel out, and therefore PF by TF is equal to P0 by T0, and we can express PF as P0 into TF by T0. Now convert the temperatures from degree Celsius to Kelvin. This is a common mistake that many students do. They do not convert it to Kelvin. Remember that when you're applying the gas laws, you have to convert the temperatures into Kelvin. And now substitute into the equation. You'll get the answer as 7.41 into 10 power 5 pascals. Note that the final temperature was about 6% greater than the original temperature, and as expected, the final pressure is also 6% greater as well. In this question, we'll calculate the number of molecules in a cubic meter of a gas. How many molecules are there in a typical object, such as a gas in a tire or water in a glass? This calculation can give us an idea of how large capital N typically is. Let us calculate the number of molecules in the air that a typically healthy young adult inhales in one breath with a volume of 500 ml at standard temperature and pressure STP, which is defined as 0 degrees C and atmospheric pressure. We use the equation PV is equal to N kBT to find N. The given values are shown, and substitute these values and solve for N. You will get 1.34 into 10 power 22 molecules. Pause the video if you need some time to do the calculations. Now you can see here that capital N is huge even in small volumes. For example, 1 centimeter cube of gas at STP contains around 2.68 into 10 power 19 molecules. Once again, note that our result for N is the same for all type of gases including mixtures. Often convenient to measure the amount of substance with a unit on a more human scale than molecules. The SI unit for this purpose was developed by the Italian scientist Amedeo Avogadro. He worked from the hypothesis that equal volumes of gases at equal pressure and temperature contains equal number of molecules, independent of the type of gas. This hypothesis has been confirmed when the ideal gas approximation applies. A mole, abbreviated as MOL, is defined as the amount of any substance that contains as many molecules as there are in exactly 12 grams, 0.012 kg of carbon-12. The number of molecules in 1 mole is called Avogadro's number, denoted Na, and the value of Avogadro's number is now known to be Na is equal to 6.02 into 10 power 23 per mole. We can now write number of molecules is equal to number of moles into the Avogadro's number. Avogadro's number relates the mass of an amount of substance in grams to the number of protons and neutrons in an atom or molecule, which roughly determines its mass. It is very natural to define a unit of mass such that the mass of an atom is approximately equal to its number of neutrons and protons. A unit of that kind accepted for use with SI is the Unified Atomic Mass Unit, abbreviated small u. It is also called the Dalton. Specifically, a carbon-12 atom has a mass of exactly 12 U, or 12 unified atomic mass unit, so that its molar mass, capital M, in grams per mole is numerically equal to the mass of one carbon-12 atom in atomic mass units. That equality holds for any substance. In other words, this constant Na is not only the conversion from number of molecules to moles, but it is also the conversion from AMU to gram. That is 6.02 into 10 power 3 unified atomic mass units is equal to 1 gram. To get an idea of how large this number 6.02 into 10 power 23 is, let's take this analogy. If we were to place table tennis balls vertically on top of each other, then if we placed Avogadro number of tennis balls, it would cover a height of 40 kilometers. This figure shows Mount Everest for scales for such a height. As an exercise for you, 2 questions have been given here with the answers. You can pause the video, work out and see whether your answers are matching or not, and then go ahead with the video. A very common expression for the ideal gas law uses the number of moles in a sample small n rather than the number of molecules. We start from the ideal gas law PV is equal to n kBT and multiply and divide the right hand side of the equation by Avogadro's number Na. This gives us PV is equal to capital N by Na into kBT. Now we know that capital N by Na is equal to the number of moles. And now look at that portion capital Na into Kb. This is a constant, and this is defined as the universal gas constant as R is equal to Na into Kb. That is, Avogadro constant into the Boltzmann constant is equal to the universal gas constant. And now we can express the ideal gas law in terms of moles as PV is equal to nRT. In SI units, R is equal to Na into Kb and its value is 8.31 joule per mole per Kelvin. In other units, R is 1.99 calorie per mole Kelvin. For calculations, you can take this to be 2 calorie per mole Kelvin or 0.0821 liter atmosphere per mole Kelvin. You can use whichever value of R is most convenient for a particular problem. Let us do a problem based on these ideas. Calculate the density of dry air under standard conditions and B in a hot air balloon at a temperature of 120 degrees C. Dry air is approximately 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen and 1% argon. We are asked to find the density or mass per cubic meter. We can begin by finding the molar mass first. If we have 100 molecules, out of which 78 are nitrogen, 21 are oxygen and 1 is argon, the average molecular mass is 78 times mass of nitrogen plus 21 times mass of oxygen plus mass of argon divided by 100, or the mass of each constituent multiplied by its percentage. The same applies for molar mass, which is therefore 0.78 into molar mass of nitrogen plus 0.21 into molar mass of oxygen plus 0.01 into mass of argon. This comes out to 29 gram per mole. We can now find the number of moles per cubic meter. We use the ideal gas law in terms of moles, PV is equal to nRT, with P is equal to 1 atmosphere, T is 273, V is 1 meter cube, and the value of R that we use is 8.31 joule per mole Kelvin. Making N as the subject of the formula, N is equal to PV by RT, substitute the values, you will get 44.5 moles. Then the mass of this air is number of moles into molecular mass. So 44.5 moles into 29 gram per mole, this gives us 1290 gram or 1.29 kgs. And finally, the density of air at STP therefore will be this mass divided by the volume. The volume we had taken 1 meter cube, so it is 1.29 kg per meter cube. Now in the second part, the air pressure inside the balloon is still 1 atm because the bottom of the balloon is open to atmosphere. The calculation is the same except that we use a temperature 120 degrees C, which is 393 Kelvin. We can repeat the calculation in A, or we can simply observe the density is proportional to the number of moles, which is inversely proportional to the temperature. And therefore we can write rho 2 into T2 is equal to rho 1 into T1. This gives us rho 2 is equal to rho 1 into T1 by T2. Substitute the values, you will get the answer as 0.896 kg per meter cube. As an exercise for you, consider the following. Liquids and gases typically have densities of the order 1000 times greater than gases. Explain how this implies that the distance between molecules in gases are on the order of 10 times greater than the size of their molecules. The ideal gas law is closely related to energy. The units on both sides of the equation are joules. The right-hand side of the ideal gas equation is N into Kb into T. We will see shortly that this term is roughly the total translational kinetic energy of N molecules at absolute temperature T. The left-hand side of the ideal gas law equation is PV. Now you can easily check that the dimensions of PV is that of energy. Here I have listed out a common problem-solving strategies for questions involving gas laws. Go through the steps, pause the video, go through the steps. Whenever you see a gas law problem, you can think of these 8 steps and proceed systematically. Moving ahead, I have repeatedly told you that the ideal gas law is an approximation. How can it be improved upon? The van der Waals equation of state improves it by taking into account 2 factors. First, the attractive forces between molecules, which are stronger at a higher density and reduce the pressure, are taken into account by adding a pressure term equal to the square of the molar density multiplied by a positive coefficient A. Second, the volume of the molecules is represented by a positive constant P, which can be thought of as the volume of a mole of molecule. This is subtracted from the total volume to give the remaining volume that the molecules can move in. The constants A and B are determined experimentally for each gas. The resulting equation is P plus An square by V square into V minus Nb is equal to nRT. In the limit of low density, where N is small, the terms A and B are negligible, and we get to the ideal gas law. On the other hand, if V minus Nb is small, meaning that the molecules are very close together, the pressure must be higher to give the same nRT as we would expect the situation of a highly compressed gas. However, the increase in pressure is less than the argument would suggest, because at high density, the N by V whole square term is very significant. Since it is positive, it causes a lower pressure to give the same nRT. The van der Waals equation of state works well for most gases in a wide variety of situations. We will see later that it even predicts the gas-liquid transition. We can examine aspects of behavior of a substance by plotting a PV diagram, which is a graph of pressure versus volume. When a substance behaves like an ideal gas, the ideal gas law PV is equal to nRT describes the relation between its pressure and volume. On a PV diagram, it is common to plot an isotherm, which is a curve showing P as a function of V with the number of molecules and temperature fixed. Thus, for an ideal gas, PV is equal to constant. For example, the volume of the gas decreases as the pressure increases. The resulting graph obviously is a hyperbola. However, if we assume van der Waals equation of state, the isotherms become more interesting as shown in this figure. At high temperature, the curves are approximate hyperbolas, representing approximately ideal behavior at various fixed temperatures. At lower temperatures, the curves look less and less like hyperbolas. That is, the gas is not behaving ideally. There is a critical temperature Tc at which the curve has a point with zero slope. Below that temperature, the curves do not decrease monotonically. Instead, they each have a hump, meaning that for a certain range of volume, increasing the volume increases the pressure. I repeat again, increasing the volume increases the pressure. Such behavior is very non-intuitive. Instead, the curves are understood as describing a liquid-gas phase transition. The oscillating part of the curve is replaced by a horizontal line showing that as the volume increases at constant temperature, the pressure stays constant. The behavior corresponds to boiling and condensation when a substance is at its boiling point for a particular pressure. It can increase in volume as some of the liquid turns to gas or decrease as some of the gas turns into liquid without any change in temperature or pressure. Now this figure shows similar isotherms that are more realistic than those based on the van der Waals gas equation. The steep part of the curve on the left of the transition region shows the liquid phase, which is almost compressible. A slight decrease in volume requires a large increase in pressure. The flat part shows the liquid-gas transition. The blue regions that they define represent combinations of pressure and volume where liquid and gas can coexist. The isotherms above Tc do not go through the liquid-gas transitions. Therefore, liquid cannot exist above that temperature, which is the critical temperature. At sufficiently low pressure above that temperature, the gas has the density of a liquid but will not condense. The gas is said to be supercritical. At higher pressure, it is solid. Carbon dioxide, for example, has no liquid phase at temperature above 31 degrees C. The critical pressure is the maximum pressure at which the liquid can exist. The point on the PV diagram at the critical pressure and temperature is the critical point. This table lists representative critical temperatures and pressures. We have previously examined pressure and temperature based on their macroscopic definition. Pressure is the force divided by the area on which the force is exerted, and temperature is measured with the thermometer. We can gain a better understanding of pressure and temperature from the kinetic theory of gases, the theory that relates macroscopic properties of gases to the motion of molecules they consist of. First, we make two assumptions about the molecules of an ideal gas. First, there is a very large number N of molecules, all identical, each having a mass m. Second, the molecules obey Newton's laws and are in continuous motion, which is random and isotropic, that is, same in all directions. To derive the ideal gas law and the connection between microscopic quantities such as energy of a typical molecule and the macroscopic quantities such as temperature, we analyze a sample of an ideal gas in a rigid container about which we make two further assumptions. The molecules are much smaller than the average distance between them, so that their total volume is much less than that of the container. In other words, we take the van der Waals constant B, which typically represents the volume of a mole of gas molecules. This B we assume to be negligible as compared to the volume of a mole of gas in the container. Next, the molecules make perfectly elastic collisions with the container of the wall and with each other. The forces on them, including gravity and other attractions represented by the van der Waals constant A, are negligible. Now, this is necessary for the assumption of isotropy also. The collision between molecules do not appear in the derivation of the ideal gas law. They do not disturb the derivation either, since collision between molecules moving with random velocities give new random velocities. Furthermore, if the velocities of gas molecules in a container are initially not random and isotropic, molecular collisions are what make them random and isotropic. We make still further assumptions that simplify calculations but do not affect the result. First, we let the container be a rectangular box. Second, we begin by considering a monoatomic gas whose molecules consist of single atoms, such as helium. Then we can assume that the atoms have no energy except their translational kinetic energy. For instance, they have neither rotational nor vibrational energy. Later, we will discuss the validity of assumption for real monoatomic gases, and we will dispense with it to consider diatomic and polyatomic gases also. This figure shows the collision of a gas molecule with the wall of a container, so that it exerts a force on the wall. These collisions are the source of pressure in a gas. As the number of molecules increases, the number of collisions, thus pressure increases. Similarly, if the average velocity of molecules is higher, the gas pressure is higher. In a sample of gas in a container, the randomness of the molecular motion causes the number of collisions of molecules with any part of the wall in a given time to fluctuate. However, because a huge number of molecules collide with the wall in a short time, the number of collisions on the scales of time and space that we measure fluctuates only by a tiny, usually unobservable fraction from the average. We can compare this situation to that of a casino where the outcomes of the bets are random and the casino's takings fluctuate by the minute and the hour. However, over long times such as a year, the casino's takings are very close to the averages expected from the odds. A tank of gas has enormously more molecules than a casino has bettors in a year, and the molecules make enormously more collisions in a second than a casino has bets. A calculation of the average force exerted by molecules on the walls of the box leads us to the ideal gas law and to the connection between temperature and molecular kinetic energy. In fact, we'll be using two averages, one over time, to get the average force exerted by one molecule with a given velocity, and then another average over molecules with different velocities. This approach was developed by Daniel Bernoulli, who is best known in physics for his work on fluid flow. Remarkably, Bernoulli did this work before Dalton established the view of matter as consisting of atoms. Now consider a container full of gas and an expanded view of an elastic collision of a gas molecule with the wall of the container, and it has been broken down into components. We have assumed that a molecule is small as compared with the separation of molecules in the gas, and that its interaction with other molecules can be ignored. Under these conditions, the ideal gas law is experimentally valid. Because we have also assumed that the wall is rigid and the particles are points, the collision is elastic. Therefore, the molecule's kinetic energy remains constant. Hence, its speed and the magnitude of momentum remain constant as well. If the molecule's velocity changes in the x direction, momentum changes from minus mvx to plus mvx. Therefore, the change in momentum is 2 mvx. According to the impulse momentum theorem, the force exerted on the ith molecule is delta pi by delta t, where delta t is the time of collision. So basically we get the force exerted on ith molecule due to the collision as 2 mvix but divided by delta T. There is no force between the wall and the molecule except while the molecule is hitting the wall. During the short time of the collision, the force between the molecule and the wall is relatively large, but that is not the force that we are looking for. We are looking for the average force. So we take delta T to be the average time between collisions of the given molecule with this wall, which is the time in which we expect to find one collision. Let L be the length of the box in the x direction, then delta T is the time the molecule will take to go across the box and back, traveling a distance of 2L at a speed of Vx. Thus delta T is equal to 2L by Vx. Substitute this and you get an expression for Fi as mvix square by L. Now this force is due to one molecule. To find the force on the wall F, we need to add the contributions of all n molecules, and taking a summation, this is the expression that we reach. Now multiply and divide by capital N, and you can see that the quantity in the square brackets is an average of the squares of the speed, and therefore we are writing it as Vx square bar. Now we want the force in terms of the speed v rather than just the x component of the velocity. Now remember that the total velocity squared is the sum of the square of its components, and it immediately follows that v square bar will be equal to vx square bar plus vy square bar plus vz square bar. Think a little, you will easily be able to justify this. Now with the assumption of isotropy, these three averages on the right hand side will be equal. That is vx square bar is equal to vy square bar is equal to vz square bar. Therefore v square is equal to vix square bar. And substitute this into the expression for force and divide by the area, and finally you will be getting PV is equal to 1 by 3 nm v square bar. Now combine this equation with PV is equal to n kBt. Now divide by capital N and multiply by 3 by 2. What you will get in the left hand side will be half m v square bar, which is the average kinetic energy of the molecule, and therefore we get the expression for average kinetic energy of the molecule to be directly proportional to its absolute temperature. That is K bar, which is half m v square bar, is equal to 3 by 2 kBt. Note in particular that nothing in this equation depends on the molecular mass or any other property of the gas, the pressure or anything, except for the temperature. Therefore, if we have two samples of helium and xenon gas with very different molecular masses, but at same temperature, the molecules will have the same average kinetic energy. And now we can pass on to the idea of internal energy. The internal energy of a thermodynamic system is the sum of the mechanical energy of all the molecules in it. We can now give an equation for the internal energy of a monoatomic ideal gas. In such a gas, the molecule's only energy is the translational kinetic energy. Therefore, denoting the internal energy by EINT, we simply have E internal is equal to number of molecules into average kinetic energy of one molecule, and therefore E internal is equal to 3 by 2 n kBt. We can convert this equation to contain the gas constant, and we will get E internal is equal to 3 by 2 nRT, where small n is the number of moles. This conversion I am leaving up to you. Also, we can solve this equation half mv square bar is equal to 3 by 2 kBt to get the typical speed of a molecule in an ideal gas in terms of temperature. And this defines what is known as the root mean square speed of the molecule. The root mean square speed of the molecule, or the square root of the average of the square of the speed v square bar, is given by Vrms is equal to root over of v square bar, and this v square bar from this equation we will get root over of 3 kBt by m. Note that this RMS speed is not the average, nor is it the most likely speed of molecules. We will see this later in distribution of molecular speeds, but it provides a good calculated estimate of the molecule speed that is related to their kinetic energy. Again, we can write this equation in terms of the gas constant. I leave this up to you to show that Vrms will be square root of 3 RT by capital M. I will now digress for a moment to come to a question that might have occurred to you. When we applied the model to atoms instead of theoretical point particles, will the rotational kinetic energy change our result? Now, this question can only be answered in terms of quantum mechanics. Now, in quantum mechanics, rotational kinetic energy cannot just take on any value. It is limited to a discrete set of values, and the smallest value is inversely proportional to the rotational inertia. Now, the rotational inertia of an atom is very tiny because almost all of its mass is in the nucleus, which typically has a radius less than 10 power minus 14 meter. Thus, the rotational energy of an atom is much more than half kT for any attainable temperature, and so the energy available is not enough to make the atom rotate. I will come back to this point when discussing diatomic and polyatomic gases later. Now we see a simple question in which we calculate the kinetic energy and the speed of a gas molecule. Part A of the question goes, what is the average kinetic energy of a gas molecule at 20 degrees C at room temperature? And part B is find the RMS speed of a nitrogen molecule at this temperature. Now for average kinetic energy, we'll straight away use 3 by 2 kT, substitute the values to get 6.07 into 10 power minus 21. Now for Vrms, it is root over of 3 kBt by small m. Small m is the mass of one molecule. I trust you can find the mass of one oxygen molecule, that too in kgs. That value will come out as 4.65 into 10 power minus 26. This I am leaving up to you. And the Vrms will come out 511 meter per second. Now note that the average kinetic energy of the molecules is independent of the type of molecule. The average translational kinetic energy depends only on the absolute temperature. The kinetic energy is very small as compared to macroscopic energies, so that we do not feel when an air molecule is hitting on our skin. On the other hand, it is much greater than the typical difference in gravitational potential energy when a molecule moves from, say, the top to the bottom of the room, so that our neglect of gravitation is justified in typical real-world situations. Also, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the RMS speed of the nitrogen molecule that we got was 511 meter per second. This is a huge speed. Now, you can argue that with such speeds, we should be always feeling a wind. No. Now, these large molecular speeds do not yield any macroscopic movement of air, since these molecules are moving in all directions with equal likelihood. The mean free path, that is the distance a molecule moves on an average between collisions, and we will talk of this mean free path later also. Now, the mean free path of molecules in air is very small, so that the molecules move rapidly but do not get very far in a second. The high value of RMS speed is reflected in the speed of sound, which is about 340 meter per second at room temperature. The higher the RMS speed of air molecules, faster sound vibrations can be transferred through air. The speed of sound increases with temperature and is greater in gases with small molecular masses such as helium. In this question, we'll calculate the escape velocity of helium atoms. Now, to escape Earth's gravity, an object near the top of the atmosphere and at an altitude of about 100 kilometers must travel away from Earth at about 11.1 km per second. This speed is called the escape speed. At what temperature would helium atoms have an RMS speed equal to the escape speed? Now, from the equation half m v square bar is equal to 3 by 2 kBt, we can make T as the subject of the formula, substitute the values, and we can calculate the mass of one helium atom. I am leaving that up to you. The calculation is shown here. And when we substitute the values, we get the temperature T as 1.98 into 10 power 4 Kelvin. Now this temperature is much higher than atmospheric temperature, which is approximately 250 Kelvin, which is minus 25 degrees C or minus 10 degree Fahrenheit at high elevations. Very few helium atoms are left in the atmosphere, but many were present when the atmosphere was formed, and more are always being created by radioactive decay. The reason for the loss of helium atoms is that a small number of helium atoms have speeds which are higher than the Earth's escape speed even at normal temperature. The speed of a helium atom changes from one collision to the next, so that at any instant there is a small but non-zero chance that the atom speed is greater than the escape speed. This chance is high enough that over the lifetime of Earth, almost all the helium atoms that have been in the atmosphere have reached escape velocity at high altitudes and have escaped from Earth's gravitational pull. Heavier molecules such as oxygen, nitrogen, and water have smaller RMS speeds, and so it is much less likely that any of them will have speeds greater than the escape speeds. In fact, the likelihood is so small that billions of years are required to lose significant amount of heavier molecules from the atmosphere. This figure shows the effect of a lack of atmosphere on the moon. Because the gravitational pull of moon is much weaker, it has lost almost its entire atmosphere. This photograph looks like as if it was taken at night with a large spotlight. In fact, the light is coming from the sun. Because the acceleration due to gravity on the moon is so low, which is about 1/6 that of Earth, the moon's escape speed is much smaller. As a result, gas molecules have escaped very easily from moon, leaving it with virtually no atmosphere. Even during daytime, The sky is black because there is no gas to scatter the light. The pressure a gas would create if it occupied the total volume available is called the gas's partial pressure. If two or more gases are mixed, they will come to thermal equilibrium as a result of collision between the molecules. As we have seen from kinetic theory, when the gases have the same temperature, their molecules have the same average kinetic energy. Thus, each gas obeys the ideal gas law separately and exerts the same pressure on the walls of a container that it would if it were alone. Therefore, in a mixture of gases, the total pressure is the sum of partial pressures of the component gases, assuming ideal gas behavior and no chemical reaction between the components. This law is known as Dalton's law of partial pressure. Dalton's law is consistent with the fact that pressures add according to Pascal's principle. In a mixture of ideal gases in thermal equilibrium, the number of molecules of each gas is proportional to its partial pressure. This result follows from applying the ideal gas law to each in the form P by N is equal to RT by V. Because the right-hand side is the same for any gas at a given temperature in a container of given volume, the left-hand side is same as well. To recapitulate, partial pressure is the pressure a gas would create if it existed alone. Dalton's law states that the total pressure is the sum of partial pressures of all the gases present. And for any two gases labeled 1 and 2 in equilibrium in a container, P1 by N1 will be equal to P2 by N2. An important application of partial pressure is that in chemistry it functions as the concentration of a gas in determining the rate of reaction. Here I mention only that the partial pressure of oxygen in a person's lungs is crucial to life and death. Breathing air that has a partial pressure of oxygen below 0.16 atmosphere can impair coordination and judgment, particularly in people not acclimated to high elevation. Lower partial pressures of oxygen have more serious effects. Partial pressures below 0.06 atmosphere can be quickly fatal and permanent damage is likely even if the person is rescued. However, the sensation of needing to breathe, as when holding one's breath, is caused much more by high concentrations of carbon dioxide in the blood than by low concentrations of oxygen. Thus, if a small room or closet is filled with air having low concentration of oxygen, perhaps because a leaking cylinder of some compressed gas is stored there, a person will not feel any choking sensation and may go into convulsions or lose consciousness without noticing anything wrong. Safety engineers give considerable attention to this danger. We will calculate the mean free path lambda, which is the average distance a molecule travels between the collisions with other molecules, and the mean free time tau, the average time between the collisions of a molecule. If we assume all the molecules are spheres with a radius r, then a molecule will collide with another if their centers are within a distance of 2r from each other. For a given particle, we say that the area of a circle with this 2r radius, which is 4 pi r square, is the cross section for collisions. As the particle moves, it traces out a cylinder with this cross-sectional area. The mean free path is the length lambda such that the expected number of other molecules in a cylinder of length lambda and cross-sectional 4 pi r square is 1. I repeat, the mean free path is the length lambda such that the expected number of other molecules in a cylinder of length lambda and cross-section 4 pi r square is 1. If we temporarily ignore the motion of molecules other than the one we are looking at, the expected number is the number density of molecules n by v times the volume, and the volume is 4 pi r square lambda. So we have n by v into 4 pi r square lambda is equal to 1. Now this gives us lambda is equal to v by 4 pi r square n. Now taking the motion of all the molecules into account makes the calculation much harder, but the change is only a factor of square root of 2. I will not get into the detailed derivation of this, and I am giving you just the result, which is lambda is equal to v by 4 root 2 pi r square n. Now in an ideal gas, we can substitute v by n is equal to kBt by p to obtain lambda is equal to kBt by 4 root 2 pi r square p. The mean free time is simply the mean free path divided by a typical speed, and the usual choice is RMS speed. Then this time tau is kBt divided by 4 root 2 pi r square p v RMS. Let's do one simple problem in calculating the mean free time. Find the mean free time for argon atoms, molecular mass 39.9 gram per mole at a temperature of 0 degrees C and a pressure of 1 atmosphere. Take the radius of argon atom to be 1.7 into 10 power minus 10 meter. Now first find the mean free speed, which is Vrms is equal to root over of 3 RT by M. I leave the calculation up to you. The value will come out to 413 meter per second. And now substitute in the equation for mean free time as tau is equal to kBt by 4 root 2 pi r square p Vrms. Substitute the values, you get a mean free time of 1.76 into 10 power minus 10 seconds. Now this result is kind of counterintuitive, but it gives a very realistic picture of molecules colliding with extremely high frequency. We know that the specific heat capacity is defined with the equation Q is equal to mc delta T, or C is equal to 1 by m Q by delta T. However, the properties of an ideal gas depend directly on the number of moles in a sample. So here we define specific heat capacity in terms of number of moles, not the mass. Furthermore, when we are talking about solids and liquids, we ignored any changes in volume and pressure with changes in temperature, which is a good approximation for solids and liquids, but for gases, we have to take some condition on the volume or pressure changes. Here we focus on the heat capacity with volume held constant. We define the molar heat capacity at constant volume Cv as Cv is equal to 1 by n Q by delta T with V held constant. This is often expressed in the form Q is equal to nCv delta T. Note that this expression for Q is only valid for this constant volume process. If the volume does not change, there is no overall displacement, so no work is done, and the only change in internal energy is due to heat flow. That is, delta E internal is equal to Q. We will see this in more detail in first law of thermodynamics. Now we use the equation E internal is equal to 3 nRT by 2 to write delta E internal is equal to 3 nR delta T by 2 and substitute delta E for Q to find Q is equal to 3 nR delta T by 2. Now this gives the simple result for an ideal monoatomic gas as Cv is equal to 3R by 2. It is independent of temperature, which justifies our use of finite differences instead of a derivative. This formula agrees very well with experimental results. Let's do a simple question based on this. A sample of 0.125 kg of xenon is contained in a rigid metallic cylinder big enough that the xenon can be modeled as an ideal gas at a temperature of 20 degrees C. The cylinder is moved outside on a hot summer day. As the xenon comes into equilibrium by reaching the temperature of its surroundings, 180 joules of heat are conducted to it through the cylinder walls. What is the equilibrium temperature? Neglect the expansion of the metal cylinder. Now the first step is to find the number of moles of xenon, which is the mass of xenon divided by its molecular mass. Molecular mass of xenon is 131.3 gram per mole, and this gives the number of moles of xenon as 0.952 mole. And using the expression previously derived, we can straightaway write delta T as 2Q by 3 nR. This gives 15.2 degrees C. So the final temperature must be 35.2 degrees C. We would now like to generalize our results to ideal gas with more than one atom per molecule. In such systems, the molecules can have other forms of energy beside translational kinetic energy, such as rotational and vibrational kinetic energies and potential energies. We will see that a simple rule lets us determine the average energies present in these forms and solve problems in much the same way as we have done for monoatomic gases. Earlier, we found that half mv square average is equal to 3 by 2 kT, and that v square average is 3 vx square average. And from this it follows that half mvx square average is equal to half kb into t. Now the same equation will hold for vy square bar and vz square bar. Therefore, we can look at our energy of 3 by 2 kBt as the sum of contributions of half kBt from each of the three dimensions of translational motion. We see that 3 in the formula Cv is equal to 3R by 2 also reflects those three dimensions. We therefore define a degree of freedom as an independent possible motion of a molecule, such as each of the three dimensions of translation. Then, letting d represent the number of degree of freedom, the molar heat capacity at constant volume of a monoatomic ideal gas can be written as Cv is equal to dr by 2, where d is 3. The branch of physics called statistical mechanics tells us, and experiment confirms, that CV of any ideal gas is given by this equation regardless of the number of degrees of freedom. This fact follows from a more general result called the equipartition theorem, which holds in classical non-quantum thermodynamics for systems in thermal equilibrium under technical conditions that right now I won't get into. Here I mention only that in a system, the energy is shared amongst the degrees of freedoms by collisions. The equipartition theorem states that the energy of a thermodynamic system in equilibrium is partitioned equally amongst its degrees of freedom. Accordingly, the molar specific heat capacity of an ideal gas is proportional to its number of degrees of freedom d. This result is due to the Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell. Consider a diatomic gas, say nitrogen or oxygen. Such a gas has more degrees of freedom than a monoatomic gas. In addition to the 3 degrees of freedom for translation, it has 2 degrees of freedom for rotation perpendicular to its axis. Furthermore, the molecule can vibrate along its axis. This motion is often modeled by imagining a spring connecting the two atoms, and we know from simple harmonic motion that such motion has both kinetic and potential energy. Each of these forms of energy correspond to a degree of freedom, giving 2 more. We might expect that for a diatomic gas we should use 7 as the number of degrees of freedom. Classically, if the molecules of a gas had only translational kinetic energy, collision between molecules would soon make them rotate and vibrate. However, it is quantum mechanics that controls which degrees of freedoms are active. This result is shown in this figure. Both rotational and vibrational energies are limited to discrete values. For temperatures below 60 Kelvin, the energies of hydrogen molecules are too low for a collision to bring the rotational or the vibrational state of the molecule from the lowest energy to the second lowest. And so the only form of energy is translational kinetic energy, and D is equal to 3 or CV is equal to 3R by 2 as in a monoatomic gas. Above that temperature, the 2 rotational degrees of freedom begin to contribute. That is, some molecules are excited to the rotational state with the second lowest energy. Note that this temperature is much lower than that where rotations of monoatomic gases contribute, because diatomic molecules have higher rotational inertias and hence have lower rotational energies. From about room temperature, a bit less than 300 Kelvin, to about 600 Kelvin, the rotational degrees of freedom are fully active, but the vibrational ones are not, and D is equal to 5. Then finally, above 30,000 Kelvin, the vibrational degrees of freedoms are fully active, and D is equal to 7, as the classical theory predicted. Polyatomic molecules typically have one additional rotational degree of freedom at room temperature, since they have comparable moments of inertia around any axis. Thus, at room temperature, they have D is equal to 6, and at high temperatures, D is equal to 8. We usually assume that gases have the theoretical room temperature values of D. This table shows that the results agree very well with agreement for many monoatomic and diatomic gases, but the agreement for triatomic gases is only fair. The differences arise from interactions that we have ignored between and within the molecule. The idea of equipartition leads to an estimate of the molar heat capacity of solid elements at ordinary temperatures. We can model the atoms of a solid as attached to neighboring atoms by springs. Analogously to the discussions of vibrations previously, each atom has 6 degrees of freedom, 1 kinetic, 1 potential for each of the x, y, and z directions. Accordingly, the molar specific heat capacity of a metal should be 3R. This result, known as the law of Dulong and Pettit, works fairly well experimentally at room temperature. For every element, it fails at low temperatures for quantum mechanical reasons. Since quantum effects are particularly important for low mass particles, the law of Dulong and Pettit also fails at room temperatures for some light elements, such as beryllium and carbon. It also fails for some heavy elements. In this question, a 300-gram piece of gallium, which is a metal used in semiconductor devices, at its melting point of only 30 degrees C, is in contact with 12 moles of air. Assume air to be diatomic, and at 95 degrees C in an insulated container. When the air reaches equilibrium with the gallium, 202 grams of gallium have melted. Based on this data, what is the heat of fusion of gallium? Assume the volume of air does not change and there are no other heat transfers. As some of the gallium has not melted, we know that the final temperature is still the melting point. Then the only heat lost is by the cooling of air, for which we will take Cv is equal to 5R by 2. The only heat gained is the latent heat of fusion of gallium, which can be written as mass of gallium into latent heat of fusion of gallium. So we can write the equation N air Cv of air into delta T plus mass of gallium into latent heat of fusion is equal to 0. And substitute the values, and you will find that the latent heat of fusion of gallium will be 80.2 kilojoules per kg. Particles in an ideal gas all travel at relatively high speeds, but they do not travel at the same speed. The RMS speed is one kind of average, but many particles move faster and many move slower. The actual distribution of speeds has several interesting implications for other areas of physics. The motion of molecules in a gas is random in magnitude and direction for individual molecules, but gas of many molecules has a predictable distribution of molecular speeds. This predictable distribution of molecular speeds is known as the Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution after its originators who calculated it based on kinetic theory, and it has since been confirmed experimentally. To understand this figure, we must define a distribution function of molecular speeds. We define the distribution function Fv by saying that the expected number n v1, v2, that is the number of particles with speeds between v1 and v2, is given by n, which is the total number of molecules, into integral v1 to v2 Fv dv. Conventionally, this equation is written in a differential form as dn is equal to n into Fv dv. That is, dn is the number of molecules with speeds between v and v plus dv, and we can read this expression as the number of molecules with speeds between v and v plus dv, which is dn on the left hand side, is equal to the total number of molecules in the sample times Fv times dv. That is, the probability that a molecule speed is between v and v plus dv is given by Fv into dv. I will now quote Maxwell's result without the proof. The distribution function Fv for speeds of particles in an ideal gas at temperature T is given by Fv is equal to 4 by root pi m by 2 kBt whole power 3 by 2 into v square e power minus mv square by 2 kBt. Now the factors before the v square are a normalization constant. They make sure that n0, infinity is n. That is, the number of molecules whose speed lies from 0 to infinity is equal to the total number of molecules. And this makes sure that integral 0 to infinity Fv dv is 1. Now let us focus on the dependence of v. The factor of v square means f of 0 is equal to 0, and for small v the curve looks like a parabola. The factor of e power minus mv square by 2 kBt means that limit of Fv as v tends to infinity is 0, and the graph has an exponential tail, which indicates that a few molecules may move at several times the RMS speed. The interaction of these factors gives the function a single peak shape as shown in this figure. Now let us use this expression to solve a simple question. In a sample of nitrogen at temperature 273 degrees, find the ratio of number of molecules with speed very close to 300 meter per second to the numbers with speed very close to 100 meter per second. Now, since we are looking at a very small range, we can approximate the molecules near 100 meter per second as dn 100 is equal to f of 100 dv, and similarly for dn 300. So the ratio that we want is dn 300 by dn 100, which is f 300 dv divided by f 100 dv, which is f 300 by f 100. So substitute those values. The calculation is a bit involved. I suggest you use a calculator for this, and you will get the answer to be 5.74. We can also use this probability distribution to calculate average values by multiplying the distribution function by the quantity to be averaged and integrating the product all over possible speeds. Doing this, the average velocity comes out as v bar is equal to integral of vfv dv, and the result is 8 kBt by pi m square root, or root over of 8 RT by pi capital M. Similarly, the root mean square speed is root over of v square bar, and in this case it will be root over of 0 to infinity v square fv dv, and this comes out to root over of kBt by m, or root over of 3 RT by capital M. And this is what we got earlier also. The most probable speed, also called the peak speed Vp, is the speed at the peak of the velocity distribution. In statistics, this would be called a mode. it is less than the RMS speed, the most probable speed can be calculated simply by differentiating the distribution function and setting to 0. The result is Vp is equal to root over of 2 kBt by m, which is root over of 2 RT by m. Now, which is less than Vrms. In fact, RMS speed is greater than both most probable and average speed. Now, the peak speed provides sometimes a more convenient way to write the Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution function, and it's easier to remember this way. That is, Fv is equal to 4v square divided by root over of Vp cube into e power minus v square by Vp square. In the factor e power minus mv square by 2 kBt, it is easy to recognize the translational kinetic energy. Thus, the expression is equal to e power minus k by kBt. That is, e power minus kinetic energy divided by the factor kBt. The distribution function can be transformed into a kinetic energy distribution using f of k dk is equal to fv dv. Boltzmann showed that the resulting formula is much more generally applicable if we replace the kinetic energy of translation with the total mechanical energy. So the Boltzmann result is Fe is equal to 2 by root pi kBt power minus 3 by 2 into root e into small e raised to minus e by kBt. These steps give us a problem-solving strategy for molecular speed distribution problems. Go through them, pause the video, go through them, and wherever you get questions involving molecular speeds, you can refer to this and solve the questions. We can now gain a qualitative understanding of a puzzle about the composition of Earth's atmosphere. Hydrogen is by far the most common element in the universe, and helium is by far the second most. However, helium is constantly produced on Earth by radioactive decay. Why are those elements so rare in our atmosphere? The answer is that gas molecules that reach speeds above escape velocity, about 11 km per second, can escape from the Earth's atmosphere into space. Because of lower mass of hydrogen and helium molecules, they move at higher speeds than other gas molecules, such as nitrogen and oxygen. Only a few exceed escape velocity, but far fewer heavier molecules do. Thus, over the billions of years that Earth has existed, far more hydrogen and helium molecules have escaped from the atmosphere than other molecules, and hardly any of either is present now. We can also take another look at evaporative cooling. Liquids, like gases, have a distribution of molecular energies. The highest energy molecules are those that can escape from the intermolecular attractions of the liquid. Thus, when some liquid evaporates, the molecules left behind have a lower average energy and the liquid has a lower temperature. Further in this video, a summary of whatever we have studied will appear on your screens, and you can go through it, you can pause the video, you can make notes from it. All the important concepts are given point-wise, and after that, the key formulae are also given after this. What follows are the key concepts followed by the key equations that we have come across. I hope you liked this video. This was a one-shot revision of the most important things in kinetic theory of gases. If you like this video, like, share and subscribe, and also mention in the comments for which topics would you like me to prepare more one-shot videos like this. Till the next time, stay healthy and stay safe you all.